assignment, used as a sort of case study, as a sort of role model for what you can do. And that is part of the topic of our next presenter, who is Kevin Lerner, an assistant professor of journalism at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, a little bit upstate from my perspective.
You can get there on the train.
That's true. You can get to New York. His research interests include press criticism, magazines, and the intellectual history of American journalism. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. To pick up on something Jeff just said, one of my proudest moments as a teacher came about 3 weeks ago when one of my colleagues came to me and said, one of my advisees was in my office, and she was carrying a book from our library. And I said to her, I've never seen one of our students carrying a book. Lerner made us do it. It was a very proud moment to see somebody actually checking out one of our library books. Many of our library books are pristine, never been stamped. I'd like to talk about one of those moments where we have a very tight curriculum at Marist College. We call ourselves a liberal arts college, though that is mostly a lie, but we do have a very large liberal arts core, and journalism is only a concentration within the communication major, which means that in designing our curriculum, we have literally 18 credits to play with for courses that we can require students to take. And we redid our curriculum in 2014. Actually, the same colleague and I rewrote this curriculum. And we were trying to move things out of a silo-based system where students were either a magazine journalist or a broadcast journalist or a print news journalist. That didn't seem to make sense anymore. We wanted to make sure everybody was exposed to everything. But that meant for a lot of these courses, particularly for the critical courses, we had to move things into sort of a menu system where they were taking one of 3 or one of 4 options. They can take as many as they want as electives, and many of our students do end up taking all of their upper-level electives within journalism. But we could only require 1 critical course for the entire program. That's all that would fit. And one of the things that happened was that we lost our mass communication law course as a requirement. So we can't require everybody to take the full mass comm law course. We didn't want them to graduate without some of that, so we've incorporated law into every one of the critical courses, which meant that every one of those critical courses had to be rewritten. And that brings us to the particular course that I'm talking about today, which is a course called Readings in Journalism, which is, or was, a course in which students read almost nothing but literary journalism. And it was a critical analysis of the classics of literary journalism. And it was a great course. By the time I inherited this course, which had been created by Neely, who I think some of you know, who is now my dean, it had moved entirely online. So this was an online reading course. Students would read great works throughout the whole semester from the 19th century to the present, whenever that was. The specific readings would change, but there were usually 2 papers doing critical analysis of the literary journalism, and in the middle, 1 paper where students would actually do some creative writing. And that had to be completely blown up when the course became a primary readings in journalism course that was not focused entirely on literary journalism. There are still great works of literary journalism in the course, but the class now incorporates reading Supreme Court opinions so that they can get a little bit of First Amendment history, reading historical works, reading critical and theoretical works of journalism, which means that the literary journalism, the creative writing stuff, is really about 3 weeks in the center of the course now, and that's about it. So the challenge is how to get students to do that kind of writing in the middle of this course. And this is where assigning a short literary style assignment in the middle of a critical course comes into play. I find that when this is what the syllabus looks like more or less, this is the narrative section of this. The one thing I wanted to point out, by the way, is that the assignment that I've worked in here goes over spring break. This is a spring-only course, and putting the assignment across spring break is a key element for being able to get this to work. And I'll show you why in a second when I get to the actual assignment. But one of the problems that I find students having is not so much on the sentence structure level. Like I said, we actually have a pretty intensive liberal arts core, a lot of writing requirements. Our students are generally fairly well prepared on a mechanical level. They're not great. You know, I'm still fixing comma splices and subject-verb agreement and punctuation errors. Those sorts of things do happen. But in general, they're fairly good communicators. What I find them having a lot of trouble doing across the curriculum is switching modes of writing. From time to time, I'll teach introduction to journalism, and I can't tell you how many leads I've had to fix that were introductions. News breaks all the time. Move on to the actual story. Yes. So the assignment in the middle of this course is two options. Students can either write a study of a place, and this is the travel study, so we'll go to the spring break first. Or they can do a travel piece. And this is why it's done over spring break, because our students are often traveling somewhere interesting over spring break. Sometimes also it is Hanc, but they do go to interesting places. And this gives them the ability to turn spring break into an assignment. So they can do a travel study, and there are very few requirements for what this is. We are looking for a little bit of insight, but a lot of thick description, a lot of narrative. These are the things that I tell them that I'm looking for. They're not long papers. These are short 3 to 4 page assignments. And they come already after the students have done their first critical paper, which comes earlier in the semester. There are actually 3 modes of writing in this course. So there's the creative assignment in the middle, 2 longer critical analysis papers, one on either side, semester-wise. And then every week they are writing forum response posts. And from the point of view of what Jeff was saying about getting students to write regularly, I think this is really important. It's the one advantage I find of being able to teach this course online. What would normally be a discussion where that one student who's done the reading is responding, this forces students every week to talk to each other, talk in quotation marks, to each other about these readings, but to do it in writing and to break them out of that sort of forced formality that the Writing 101 puts on them. I find that students get most awkward when they feel like they have to write formally. And this is a real issue throughout the semester. The other option is to be able to go into a bar or a coffee shop. One student this semester wrote about the bowling alley, and just hang out. Hang out for a couple hours, observe, maybe talk to some people. This is a course that is an elective for most students. We have about half and half journalism students and non-journalism students. Some of them have never done an interview before they come into this course, so it's not required, but they've all watched something. And they can go and watch for an hour and write about what happens. This is the grading rubric. It's about a 1,200, 1,800 word piece, generally, and it breaks down into reporting and observation. Grammar and punctuation is actually quite a small part of what we're looking for, though I do intensely edit every one of these. This course, by the way, I should mention, caps at 25 people, and it always fills. And being able to manage luckily we do get paid a little bit more to teach online because there's an intense amount of responding to all of those forum posts. So the line editing really just happens on the 2 critical papers and on this paper, but they do get that feedback as they go. So things that I've learned from doing this. I know everything about Mahoney's. I am so sick of Mahoney's. I will never go near Mahoney's. Mahoney's, it just sounds awful from everything I've read about it. They seem to love it, and that's like the grown-up bar, that's the senior bar, as opposed to the other ones that apparently will accept Mahoney's. Mahoney's is very strict, that's why they go there. So that has actually limited the student choice a little bit. I find that the students who chose the local bars were a little bit less perceptive, and so I think in the future I may actually force them to go to a place they hadn't been before and sort of shake themselves out of the complacency of seeing things they've always seen. And it may also have just been that they were lazy and said, well, I've always been at Mahoney's, I'll just remember what I've seen at Mahoney's and read that. So the students who leave their comfort zone do seem to write better. And I don't know if this is correlation or causation, but the students who force themselves to go somewhere that they've never been before are the ones who seem to have the most self-awareness and the most awareness of their surroundings. The beach narratives are mixed. Some of them are, I went to this beach town and I noticed the disparity between the surrounding town, which was crushing poverty, and this wealthy resort where my parents paid for me to drink tropical drinks. And it made me feel guilty and want to do something different. The ones that really drove me nuts weren't the ones that didn't notice it, but the ones who noticed it and said, I was so happy to finally be in this wall resort and away from that scary island that surrounded it. Those crushing. They're allowed that opinion, but there were quite a few students who still had the trouble breaking out of that introduction. You know, there were a lot of students who would write an essay about what I did on my spring break, and that is tough when there's only one assignment to get them to change that in the future. I wanted to show you a couple of these examples. I don't have much to say about them. These are some bar and coffee shop assignments. These are just examples where the dialogue worked pretty well, or they picked up on some good ideas. These are all student writing. These are all, in fact, screenshots, so they're all different typefaces. I like this one. He sits by himself in the wooden booth studying chessboard and chess. Yeah, reading chess for dummies. So he's learning as he goes. This is one of the better Mahoney stories, talking about how it reminds them of play dates when they were children, except no computer involved. Oh, this is the this is where we learn about Chugs.
Oh no!
One of the regulars at the bowling alley. You can probably guess how he got his nickname. This is one of the travel stories. This is where a student is heading to the beach. Every drink is $4. It comes with coconut, but it seems as though nobody knows what's in the drinks. Never seen water that blue. And I think lakes don't have sharks. This is somebody who's going diving with dad and starts getting worried.
Dad, the big scary boss.
Yeah, dad is the big scary boss. But in her defense, dad was the one who was saving him at this point. But then when we get to the second paper, this ends up being very small. One of the options for the second critical paper is to analyze one of these creative works more intensely. And I find that the students, when they get to this, have a much better understanding, bless you, of what comes into a creative work. So they actually, by having done it, have a better understanding of how to read it, even if it's not something that they're going to be doing. So you can see some of this analysis. This is studying, no, I don't even know which article she's analyzing in this one, but she's quoting a few of the writers talking about criticism, and I think she's got some good insight when she starts to look at these papers. This one's maybe a little bit longer. One of the challenges of narrative journalism is that it can make it seem like, and sometimes actually be, an attempt to cover up when the reporter did not get enough information for a solid story. And I think having that analysis is really great. I actually found, is this the one? Yeah, this is from the Love Me Tinder story, which was a long form piece that came out 2 or 3 years ago about the dating app Tinder. I believe this is the student who believed that oh no, this is the one who said they did not cover it up. I actually had two opposing essays, one who said this piece was actually underreported, which I thought was interesting that she was able to do that. And then the analysis actually comes into the final exam as well. I give them an option here the final exam is all about All the President's Men, because they have to read the full book at the end. And to analyze the storytelling in All the President's Men, and to get into the tone of that. It is an option they can skip. I give them 6 questions and they can choose any 5, so they could skip this question if it's one that they decided they didn't want to do. Exams were due at midnight, so I have not yet read them. But I'll let you know at some point how this turned out, how many of them did choose to look at this style. You know, I find the style of All the President's Men to be very distinctive. You know, the choice of using Woodward or Bernstein instead of I, because of course it's a co-authored book. The very spare style that is newspapery, but also a little bit of a mystery story feeling. There's a really interesting analysis. I'm curious to see how the students are going to pick up on this. First time I've given this particular assignment, so I don't know how it's going to work out, but it is something that they're doing. So that's how we've managed to put a little bit of creative writing into a course that's not too easy. Thank you.
Well, I introduce our last panelist, and then we're going to take questions. I just want to underscore something Jeff said. As a working journalist myself, I'm amazed at how my students are surprised that the very idea of going someplace is part of the reporting. And, you know, of actually just using your eyes and ears. What? Really? I can do that? I can watch? And I think sending them to coffee shops or bars is such a great idea. And it also does something else. It gets them out from behind their screens and gets them out into the world. Yeah. And I think, I hate to say it, separate topic, but a lot of professional journalists I know sit on their asshole too much too, and should be out in the world reporting these stories.
Well, to pick up on that and to praise somebody who's in the room, I often use Miles McGuire's advanced reporting textbook, and observation is central to his theme of what students should be doing. And so I love getting them out into the world. And I find that a very useful textbook, so thank you.
And I think it's a great way, that's a technique everybody can bring into their classrooms. So if I really need to introduce the last panelist, you've been at the wrong conference for the last 2 days. He was described, for those of us who were at the dinner last night, our last panelist was described in adhesive terms. So I would prefer not to think of him.
You've been thinking about that all morning.
So I would prefer not to think of him as the Elmer's glue of IALJS. Rather think of him and Norm as the sort of heart and soul of IALJS. I think most of you know that David Abrahamson is a professor of journalism and the Charles Deering McCormick Professor of Teaching Excellence at the Medill School at Northwestern University, where of course he teaches literary journalism. He is also, you know, the El Jefe here at the IALJS. You know, David and I talked briefly a little bit about his perspective on this whole topic. And I couldn't help but think, David, that if I were writing teaser copy for like a local news broadcast in the States, it would be something like, coming up, David Abrahamson is going to talk about the decline of writing skills, and what he has to say may shock you. Because I know you have some different viewpoints. So, David?
First of all, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for coming to the first panel on Saturday. I know that's a sacrifice. Appreciate it. I'll also thank John and Mitzi for this wonderful project, and the fact that it's a long-term project is really one of the most extraordinary things. We all love literary journalism, but how one teaches it is always an important question, and you've kept us addressing it over and over again, which I think is wonderful. I think I have to confess I'm going to be a little bit contrarian. I was fascinated by the results of the survey, and maybe not contrarian, maybe just outlier. That I could find my answers in every single chart, and they were often the shorter bar rather than the longer bar. But that was okay. There's always a range. I hope we don't come across as a grump in this. And I don't know whether I'm either locked in the past or I'm the story of the future, or in, you know, lost in some alternate, indeterminate other universe. But here's my take on all this. Going back to the citation of Carter and Harper's, I think I believe high expectations in the classroom are everything. The students see through our body language, through our choice of words, through how we interact with them on all sorts of nonverbal levels. They take that message and they internalize it in ways that we could never even imagine. And so if one approaches this whole question in the following way, it seems useful to me. And that is, the question is, where is the bar? That's a question I ask myself all the time. And I suppose there are three answers, which are obvious. One is to pitch your class at the level of the slower members. And that way you make sure you don't leave anybody behind, which is good. But it also, you can pick the board, quicker students out very, very quickly, and that's not a good thing. You can pitch it at the middle, the mean or the median, and there's a certain sense of security there. But then you see you're losing the slowest and you're boring the fastest, and so it's the worst of both worlds, it seems to me. And then you can pitch it at the top and encourage everyone to scramble and say, this is the standard, and it may put you in a slightly uncomfortable place right now, but if you improve and approach it, you'll feel really, really good about yourself. Perhaps I'm flattering myself at this moment to say, guess which one I use. I use the latter. I'm a real believer in that lovely saying of my favorite Irish poet, William Butler Yeats. Education isn't filling a bucket, it's lighting a fire. We all know that one well. I sort of live by that. And here are two things I do to try to be useful. I say in the first class, and then repeat over and over again, two chestnuts. One is a quote that I can't remember where I learned, but I tell the students that they're going to write the best piece they've ever written in my class. And I say, you're going to be responsible for doing that, and it all comes from within you. There's nothing in my head I'm trying to put in your head. I'm trying to help you find something that's inside yourself. And the aphorism is, I want you to find the region of your heart where the animal roams free. I'm looking at that lesson from South Africa. The region of your heart where the animal roams free. And then I look at one of the students and I say, do you even know you have an animal in your heart? They're all kind of, oh God, he's crazy now. But I said, well, you do, and you have to find it, because most of you don't know where it is and don't know what the region is and what the animal is. And so writing is a lovely way to determine that, and that's going to be our mission. The second big thing I say over and over again is you cannot fail. I will not allow you to fail. Failure is not an option. I would rather use, I hate sports metaphors, but I would rather you swing as hard as you can and miss it completely than not swing at all. No bunts in this class. Bunt is the little thing. I got it. It seems just so. At first, obviously, they're terrified because there's no formula, there's no easy way. That the responsibility is on them. But very, very quickly, with a little bit of care and kindness, they realize that they're being given an opportunity, and almost all of them really, really rise to the occasion. One of the implications of this, in terms of what we do with the class, is that even though some have just had the most introductory journalism courses, skills courses, I dismiss short-form journalism altogether. I say we're not going to talk about little 200-word things. We're not going to do. You all know how to do listicles. You all are completely competent, in tweeting and all that. You've taught yourself that when you were probably 11 years old. we're not going to talk about it. We're going to talk about something bigger and something much more substantial and something much more aspirational. And I'm going to encourage you to do that, which is a way of sort of telling them, everyone down to the deep end of the pool. Don't worry, I won't let you drown, but come to the deep end of the pool. And the first piece is going to be like 1,500 to 2,000 words, which is sort of a scary operation. And you can imagine the student is the first in the family to go to university and not terribly confident about their verbal skills. But it's amazing how they rise to the occasion when given the opportunity to rise to the occasion. I do a lot of the students teaching themselves. Everything we do in the class is shared with everyone else using a listserv. And my rationale for that is that I tell them that almost all of the things that I still remember from my own formal education, I learned from other students and their work rather than from the person at the front of the class. And so I want you're going to see copies of everything else everyone does. I don't expect you to read every word, but I do expect you to scan it. And we should be able to talk about it, and I can call on you, and you can have something to say about it. You should know what we're talking about. And I think, by and large, I hope, she'll think, Dad hope. I flatter myself by thinking most of them do it most of the time. Actually, I don't really know. But that interactivity includes the following. I believe in teaching writing by starting out using the proposal or query model, that you have to be able to tell somebody what it is you're going to write before you write it. There are many other ways to write. There's the stream of consciousness, the interior monologue, there's all kinds of other ways, but we're going to use the way that you can tell me what the piece is going to be before you do it. When you go out and do the reporting, it might change. But the difference between literary journalism or more advanced journalism and conventional journalism is I have no preconceived notions. I'm going out, I'm going to do my reporting, and my conclusion will come from my reporting, which is objective, and we all know not really objective. It comes with a whole set of premises and expectations. You're going to have to tell me what it is you're going to do. And we speak about a query, but the essence of it is they have to answer the following question. In this piece, I will assert that fill in the blank. In this piece, I will assert it. And that's the thematic statement, that's the central argument. And that's kind of difficult for students to do because they've been taught the conventional journalist method. And so they struggle with that a little bit. Proposals are shared with a fellow student. A fellow student has to write a critique of it. And the critique is written as if it's a beloved editor dealing with a beloved contributor saying how this can be improved. And the idea behind that is that a student can be critical about other work rather than their own in a much easier fashion. Then the students write the piece, and then every student is given the manuscript of yet a different student, and they try to edit the piece. How can it be improved? Some do a wonderful job. For some, it's their first real experience in line editing, but they see other people, so they get to sort of see how it's done. And they write an editing memo about, as if they're writing to their boss, saying this is what I think should be done to improve the piece. Once again, critical skills applied to work other than their own. That may be the most intense learning experience they have. When they turn in the manuscript the first time, I do not grade it. I annotate it and return it back to them. They then do the first rewrite. I annotate it the second time. I turn it back to them for a second rewrite. The second rewrite is turned in, and then it's graded. When that fellow student's being involved in the editing process, I think provides a little bit of emotional distance that sort of lowers the temperature of the classroom and they get to know each other, they get kind of used to each other, we're all in this together, no one's being made to look bad. It tends to make the whole system work kind of somewhat of a mystery to me. Okay, that's what we do. And my conclusion, I wrote out because I wanted to make sure I get it right. A brief word about the changes we face, specifically the nature of our students. Yes, they have changed and continue to change. To my eye, especially in the last 15 years or so. Does that comport with your experience as teachers? Do you think students are changing? A few nods. The claim we are given work is indeed different, perhaps even in a constant state of flux. That is to say, my own educational experiences as a student have very little utility to me as a teacher in the classroom. The way I was taught is not the way that I can teach anymore. I know that now. It wouldn't work at all. A very important point to be kept in mind is that students today are as confused about all the changes facing journalism as we are. Perhaps that contributes to making them even more challenging to teach, more concerned about the future, and less deferential. This last aspect, deference. I admit it can be a little troubling, even problematical at times. But then I remind myself that I am charged with educating journalists. And whether their future working lives, and in their future working lives, they are facing petulant officialdom and all the many challenges and uncertainties that will certainly characterize their professional lives in the years to come. And so it will be perseverance and fortitude, not deference, that will serve them and our profession exceedingly well. Thank you.
We're going to take questions in 2 minutes. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple of observations, maybe to add on to some of the things that David and the other panelists said. Some great words of advice about teaching writing that I learned from Roy Peter Clark, the eminent Poynter Institute scholar, when I did a fellowship there, when they used to have faculty fellowships. And I've used this with every one of my classes, and even teaching professional writers or aspiring professional writers, which I sometimes do. It's worked with them, and I find it kind of relaxes them for some reason. I tell them two things, and I attribute this to Roy when I do say it. Clark says that we become better writers by doing three things. One, by writing, obviously, which everybody's talked about. Two, by reading good writing, which is a reminder to them, to encourage them to read some of the articles that we, and not only the ones that we hold as hallowed literary journalism texts. As John Capulla mentioned in his panel a couple of years ago, most of my students don't know who Frank Sinatra is and don't care about his cold. So it is a reminder to read some, to incorporate other articles. But so we become better writers by writing, by reading good writing, and third, by talking about writing. And that I often find is sort of irrelevant. Oh, we can talk about it? Isn't it like a solitary thing and then you grade it? No, we talk about it. And that sort of not only gives us permission to talk about it in the class, but it's a nice way to introduce a class and to show them that what we're doing in our dialogue, talking about your writing and whether, discussing it, comparing it, sometimes criticizing it, is a natural part of the writing process. I talk all the time about my writing to anybody who'll listen. And part of it is not just to hear myself talk. Part of it is I find it's a valuable process. And those of you who in the room who worked as professional writers probably know it's a great way to get feedback, to see if your ideas make any sense, to bounce ideas off and leads and, what do you think of this, what do you think of that? And I found that works very well for my students. The other thing that relaxes them a little bit is that I tell them, I, as the teacher, and I think this is true for all of us, I cannot make you a great writer. I can't even make you a good writer, but everybody can become a better writer. Mm-hmm. And I do think that is true. So on that note, some questions for our panel. Come on. don't be shy. Thank you.
Kevin,
Yes.
what's the turnaround for your, like the pieces that they write?
Not nearly fast enough. I just went through a 10 review, and turning grades back quickly is one of the things I'm supposed to work on. I mean, to get through 25 of those takes at least a couple of weeks. I mean, and to be able to give really thorough advice, especially teaching 3 or 4 classes in a semester, it probably takes 2 weeks on average, at least.
David, can you answer that same question?
When they turn them in, I wish I had 3 weeks. I'm on a quarter system, 10 weeks. I have to, I cheat. We have a Monday, Wednesday class. I'm on a Monday, Wednesday rotation, and I have to turn them on Wednesday, and I have to back it up on Monday. But that means a couple of 10-hour days, 12-hour days. Right? But I kind of look and say, oh no, oh God, and there's so many other things I want to do. But I get into it and I start to just have so much fun. And what about this? What about that? The phrase "be in flow."
Yeah.
You're kind of lost in a job. I get into flow, and my wife brings in a little muffin and a little cup of coffee. Once I get out, I have no idea how it is. I'm just off of my alternate universe.
Do you have them submitted on paper or electronically?
They do it electronically, and I printed my school was generous about printing cartridges, and I print them all out. But I edit them by hand. I don't edit on this movie.
David, I just have to mention, and Mitzi and everybody else, this is already like the idea for the next teaching panel is grading. We've talked about that in the past. How many people would want a panel about how to grade writing? All right, so something to consider. Yes.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm going to preface my questions, which is to everybody, by sharing that I have in my literary journalism course in Sydney, Australia, a one-semester course, 12 years of credit, 320,000 words of accessible reading to do for a 40-student class. Okay, two seminar groups, 40 students, and that's a problem. But what I'm going to want to, if any of you can tell me your class size, your standard literary journalism class, the number of contributable words, accessible words, what's the word length on assessments, and is there a publication outcome that is kind of like, not guaranteed, but is there a pathway to publication which produces portfolio publications?
Wow. How did you calculate that word count?
A 5,000 word piece of literary journalism is the major assignment at the end. And then there's a 1,200 word research exercise, I think, in the beginning. And I can't really remember what, it was probably a pitch.
God, I gotta like lay down, just thinking. Any thoughts, Jeff?
Well, so I've taught literary journalism essentially 3 ways and once each way. At a previous institution, I taught it as a master's level class, and I think we had 9 or 10 students. So it was, and they were grad students. So it was a lot of fun. It was a great class, and that was in an English department, and so rich discussion. I've taught it, I've used it as my theme in a freshman composition course, and that was like night and day. And it's very structured in terms of the assignments. They have to do a response, a textual analysis, a rhetorical analysis, and something else. And it was, it's in the neighborhood of 20 to 23 students or something like that. And I've always taught, the third way is I've taught it as an independent study, which was also a very rich experience. But I've always taught it as a textual analysis, reading and, trying to get good critical response. In part because my colleague John Capunia teaches a narrative nonfiction class that's a bit more applied, and we're trying not to step on each So I don't know how helpful that really is.
No, anything is
Yeah.
helpful, yeah.
But certainly, I mean, you know, like the freshman comp course, you know, I mean, their essays are usually, you know, anywhere from, you know, 500 words to maybe 12 or 1,500, so it's certainly not the load that you're looking at.
Yeah, it's a master's course, by the way.
Our skills classes are capped at 18, typically we may have 15, it's not surprising that there are only 15 students in the class. The readings, they do 100,000 words of readings. I have to read the long pieces, I have to read the Hiroshima. I don't know if they read them all, but someone has to do a recitation of the readings, so at least I know one person. They read about 50,000 words of their other students' work. Well, they get email. And they produce between 5,000 and 6,000 words of their own work over the course of a quarter, as a 10-week.
Fantastic.
I'll just comment on that last part. I think you're right on to think about like publication outlets. I mean, publishing it sort of raises the bar for students, I found, and it sort of gives them, it sort of makes them feel a little bit more special. Like, this really counts. I really did something. One way I found that was helpful is, like many student newspapers, I assume you have a student publication there, they're always desperate for articles, typically. Having been a student editor like most of us, you're always desperate for content. Maybe one thing is to funnel a lot of the articles from your students, or the best, to the student paper, talk to the faculty advisor, ask them, or the student editor, ask them if they'll have like a showcase from your class, and they'll print online or in print the 10 best stories as deemed by you. Make it a little bit of a competition. Combine them up and
Can I have
coffee too.
a note to that? I have, like, so I taught this, I created this course at a college, and now I'm teaching at Stony Brook. I created 2 news outlets for 2 separate sections of my course. We publish on a weekly basis, and they have like, one is called the Long Islander.info, and the other one is the Osprey.info, and they compete against each other for schools and stuff. I found that having those outlets, first, like, it pushes them to actually see the work out there, and secondly, in many communities are underserved in terms of the news. So when you publish things, sometimes they're not covered by anybody else. So you have people eventually reading your paper. We have like, I don't know, like 20,000 readers a week. They're weekly. Each one of them has 20,000 readers a week. And we get some people, well, we have people from Newsday, we have people from different magazines on Long Island who are poaching our stories or asking our students if they can publish the stories. So they take it seriously. On top of that, news, like the student news outlets, right, from the campus.
So you could create your own. I like the idea personally. I know like a lot of student papers are struggling right now. And I kind of like the idea of supporting them, and also maybe it provides somebody's interest to get into the student publication. But that's great, creating your own.
Yeah, I asked the question because there's a big move in Australia now in journalism education for the establishment of outward-facing online publications attached to courses. So that the course is called something like Advanced Professional Practice, and students can, it's like an internal internship course where they work for an editor who's employed. He's not necessarily an academic, but probably could be. And that's a really big move in Australian education at the moment. And last year we did a project with 28 Australian universities covering a federal election.
Interesting.
And that was amazing. It's transformed the way we're thinking about our teaching now, because there was so much more buy-in from the students. Because portfolio publications seems to be one of the big things that they want, and they got them. Also it encouraged cooperation between the students in a way where we could take stronger students and give them a stake in editing the work of slower students with a byline, like a joint byline. So, which
matters. They love to show that to their parents. No, that's great. That's an interesting case study right there.
Yes.
Yes, I think your hand was up first, Scott.
This is about something that I've been thinking for years, and I feel it's a disparity between 2 or 3 of the things that appear in the answers to the test, to the survey, and what you said here. Some of the quotes were about ensuring the anonymity of the work you show, or the professors show, of what the students do, not only of the things that are bad, the mistakes, for not to shaming them in public, but also one of them said, I mean, I choose the best, but we'll see what is the best that can be done, and make sure that there's no traceable. I studied that was the way in which I was taught at Columbia, and then when I started teaching, I did it that way, but year after year I went to making the name public and making them even read their own piece, and all of us discussing. I think, especially in literary or narrative journalism, if you want them to find a voice, the voice is themselves. Right. Then I think from the very beginning, we have to make them be aware that they are responsible for what they write, and their name is there. And many of them have had, they publish in social media, and have blogs, so I mean, for me, it's, and also because even when we say, I won't say who did this, but this is very bad, the second question of the inverted pyramid is who. So the others will, if they want, they will immediately find out. And this is sometimes they will, instead of paying attention to the problem, they will say, oh, who did that? And they will be thinking strategies.
Yeah.
I feel very strongly about that. I don't anonymize anything. You know, in my rationale, I mean, I understand there's a downside to it, but my rationale is, you know, we're writing for the public print. We're not writing for our diaries. We're not writing some memoir published after I did. We do a public performance. There's an issue, an ancillary issue to that is, well, I don't want to name names in my piece. Can I use pseudonyms? Or please don't submit my piece for the AJMC student writing contest because I'm criticizing my coach, you know, blah, 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 whatever it is. And I mean, I can't force a student to submit a piece for the contest. But I have a one-on-one conversation with them, trying to sort of move them to a different place and say, no, what we do in the public for a public reason, and now's a good time to start to get used to it.
We had somebody over here, yes.
Actually, I think out of your sideline, John, I think you were next, and then.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, I apologize.
I realize I'm quite privileged because the course that I run is for working journalists who've been working for a while, but they also get stuck in that reporterly style and find a great deal of difficulty coming out of it. But I have a cunning plan when it comes to feedback, which I borrowed from the creative writing colleagues, is that we run it as a workshop. So all the feedback, so everybody shares their stories as they go, and all the feedback happens in the workshop. And I really try to stay quite far back in the discussions. I make various people responsible for responding to people's work and give them some tools, some of them borrowed from Tom Wolfe, so they have to look for things like scene-by-scene description, scene-by-scene construction, and those sorts of things. And there are 3 assignments through the course, and what I find usually is that in the first workshops, the feedback is quite hapless, actually, and people are not, you know, they have to be pushed to look at certain things. By the 3rd workshop, it's like I don't have to be there to give the feedback. They've got it, you know, and I think it's very helpful because some of them may eventually be able to bring that critical eye to their own work, but also there may be a point at which they are maybe features editors and they're working with younger people, so they need to develop that. and I find that the work really improves dramatically over that 14 weeks.
On the question of student editing students, Robin, I think, mentioned it, and David as well. My only experience with that was maybe 5 years ago, and I inherited a course in which that was part of the practice, and I found it just created confusion and heartache and even fury that that students editing students oftentimes would show them the wrong things, and if they were more popular, charismatic students, next thing you know, I'd have a pretty good student going in the wrong direction, and then I'd have students coming in tears that this idiot, blah, blah, blah. And so after a couple of years of trying to follow, I just said, to hell with it, and I just cut it out. Is there something I'm missing here that I should actually be doing this?
I think John's point about talking, you have to write, you have to practice, you have to read, and the talking is new to me, and I love it. It's perfect. And I was blessed with a really great mentor early in my professional career. And he could talk about writing that you would just sit there enthralled about. And everything he said was both tangible and inspiring and blah, blah, blah. And I realized that my job in the classroom was to give them a vocabulary to talk about reading. And I don't care if you like it. Do you think it works? Why? So you have to say why you think what the writer did worked or doesn't work. A lot of it has to do with sort of modeling the behavior of someone who knows something about writing and likes to talk about it. And you sort of model that behavior for the students, and very quickly they pick up on it. That's what I feel. Yeah, the students ever kind of take another student's work in the wrong direction? Yeah. But I have a way to sort of course correct later. But I understand your heartache, but it has to do with what's going on in the class.
I can no longer control our colleagues. So, on that note, let's give a round of applause.